Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Anthropuzzled podcast. I'm your host, Abby Letzinger, and every 2 weeks we'll explore how anthropologists are forging unique career paths beyond the usual academic sphere. Tune in, get inspired, and start piecing together your own career puzzle within the world of anthropology. On today's episode, we have Paulina Meléndez. She graduated from the University College London with a master's in bioarchaeology and forensic anthropology. She has worked as a forensic anthropology laboratory coordinator, post-excavation laboratory technician, and as an assistant field archaeologist. How are we doing today?
Hi, Abigail. I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing great as well. Now, what's so important about bioarchaeology and forensic anthropology and the role they play in today's world?
It's important because with bioarchaeology, we can understand past populations better, and this will help us advocate and work towards better and healthier societies. In forensic anthropology, when we're applying it in medical legal contexts, it can help us name and identify missing individuals, close cold cases, assess for injury in cases of accidental and non-accidental trauma. So forensic anthropology can also definitely aid clinicians due to our expertise in skeletal trauma and specialized knowledge of skeletal biology and human anatomy. And it's really interesting the work bioarchaeologists and forensic anthropology can do. There's so much that can be done. And I'm very happy to be a part of it. I think we're doing a really good service to our heritage, to the people around us, and giving answers when they're needed or possible explanations as well.
So, what are the differences between biological anthropology, biological archaeology, and forensic anthropology? Because I know that some of them share some similarities in the context of which they're working, but what exactly are those differences?
So basically, if we want to look deeper into the subfields, simply put, is the study of how hominid species have biologically evolved over time. It looks at how the biological and cultural environment shaped our skeletal morphology. Biological anthropologists, also known and still called as physical anthropology in many countries, can study existing or extinct humans, our ancestors, and our non-human relatives from a biological and evolutionary context. So biological anthropologists can look at human origins, development, behavior, and biological diversity at the individual and population level. In bioarchaeology, we're studying skeletal remains from archaeological contexts to reconstruct human life and health from individuals and populations. So bioarchaeologists integrate both archaeological and biological anthropology methods to look at past human diets, health and disease, and cultural activities for studying skeletal remains, both human and non-human, such as floral and faunal. Bioarchaeologists focused on studying animal remains are zooarchaeologists, and those focused on the study of floral botanical remains are known as archaeobotanists. Bioarchaeologists who choose to focus on non-human remains, they study the human-environment relationships. And they ask and look at questions of like what cuisine, resources, and strategies did past peoples use in specific sites and at what times and what seasons and for what potential reasons. We can definitely study past cultural movement and activity from individuals, and this can be traced and studied archaeologically through non-material and material culture. This obviously including food, artifacts, and livestock. So forensic anthropology is the application of biological anthropology and archaeological methods in the recovery and analysis of human skeletal remains from medical, legal, and contemporary contexts. Forensic anthropologists apply their knowledge of anthropology, archaeology, anatomy, skeletal biology, and other natural sciences such as biology, physics, and chemistry to analyze or reconstruct skeletal remains from crime scenes, unidentified and missing individuals, and from mass graves or disasters. As forensic scientists, they're often called to testify as expert witnesses in a court of law. And all these fields and specialties may and can overlap depending on the nature of the sites, the research, and or investigation questions that are at hand. These fields share required knowledge of ecology, paleoecology, biological anthropology, human anatomy, archaeology, and skeletal biology. And we can see sometimes these methods overlap.
Okay, so now that we know the difference between those three fields of biological anthropology, biological archaeology, and forensic anthropology, what's the history behind them? Like, what brought them or started them in the United States?
That is a really great question. And the beginnings of biological anthropology bioarchaeology and forensic anthro in the United States have a lengthy history behind them. Biological anthropology in the U.S. started out with Franz Boas. I'm sure you've heard about him, who promoted the four-field approach in anthropology. Before, the field and discipline of biological anthropology would be housed in sociology, anthropology, and history departments. The topics of what were human variation, evolutionary biology, they were already being covered years before, close to, the Renaissance and Enlightenment times in natural science faculties and schools that were specializing in human biology and evolution, specifically in human anatomy and medical dissections. Basically looking at human skeletal remains to understand biological variation from earlier hominid species and modern-day humans. Previously mentioned, Frederick Ward Putnam developed two of the nation's foremost centers of anthropological research at Harvard University and the University of California, Berkeley, and had a prominent part in founding and building four major anthropological museum collections. These were just some of the key anthropologists, amongst others that are known and who significantly contributed to the establishment and development of biological physical anthropology as an academic discipline in the United States. And what we can see in common with these individuals is that many of them were physicians. They were like anatomists, very much interested in looking at the human body from a medical perspective. But when they started looking at other skeletal remains from different parts of the world, from different time periods, a lot of questions were being asked. Well, where is this variation happening? How is it happening? Where in the body? And what time frame are we looking at it from? Is there any connection? These are the questions that one would ask when looking at things anthropologically, because the environment and culture is interacting with the body. So, the body doesn't exist in a vacuum, but it is very much affected by its environment and where it is found. So those are some of the individuals who were really interested in these questions when the field was being developed in the United States. So bioarchaeology in the United States started out with Jane Wikstra's Archaeological Study of Human Remains, which is a really good paper on bioarchaeology in the United States and how it is separated in different points or eras, if you want to call them. Hugh Larson focuses a lot on the history and development of bioarchaeology in the United States. And bioarchaeology was being developed during a time when classification and typology were still a part of the archaeological study of past populations. And during that time, symposium that was organized by Robert Blakely aimed at discovering the processes of biocultural integration and adaptation as documented by the study of human remains from archaeological settings. And so basically, we're seeing the integration of bioanthropology in bioarchaeology as documented by Wikstra's study from archaeological human remains. And in that occasion, and that's the symposium specifically, Wikstra proposed a study of archaeological human remains that was very contextualized, very specific to the site, one that was regionally based and included interdisciplinary approaches and research. So we're not just looking at human remains from a site. We are integrating the biocultural aspect into the research and while we're doing the field work. So we're not just looking at remains and we're taking them out from there. Why were these remains put here in the first place? So those are questions that bioarchaeologists, as much as biological anthropologists and forensic anthropologists, will want to ask themselves whenever they're faced with contemporary human remains or even looking at not so distant human remains. Simultaneously, George Armelagos and his colleagues were making the case for a skeletal biology that would shift from description to focus on the biological study of human remains in the context of culture, behavior, and environment, and addressing hypotheses and research questions from other previous ongoing studies and posterior studies that were also asking similar bioarchaeological questions. And the collective work of all these individuals in bioarchaeology resulted in a number of important theoretical innovations. And these developments basically laid the groundwork for research problems investigating patterns of health and lifestyle, including studies in the context of foraging to farming transitions in prehistory, human adaptation and biological history with larger regions, and paleodemographic patterning, health transitions in the Western Hemisphere, and also looking at diasporic activity in North America, specifically the African diaspora in North America. So bioarchaeology went through various eras or revolutions, and to summarize these revolutions was firstly looking at skeletal functional adaptation by biomechanical analyses, the second being stable isotope records for reconstructing diet, mobility, population history, and health. The third one being assessing population history from ancient biomolecules, which is basically extending biodistance data in the genomic age. So this was around the time in which Human Genome Project was being very much looked into and talked about. And part 4, the health history from ancient biomolecules. And these are just some of well-summarized points in the origins and development of bioarchaeology in the United States. So the beginnings of forensic anthropology in the United States can be traced to the late 19th century, with Walter Krugman's efforts were significant in getting the discipline related to law enforcement and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So it was Krugman's efforts to let law enforcement and the Federal Bureau know that you have scientists who are very well trained and knowledgeable in skeletal biology and human skeletal identification that at that time was very necessary. And so as a consequence, anthropologists were starting to become involved in governmental affairs. The use of anthropological identification techniques was starting to be more refined, and this happened close to the time of the Korean War within the U.S. Army. And some milestones of the field in forensic anthropology, that in the United States in 1897, the first anthropologist, George Dorsey, served as an expert witness in the death investigation of the Ludger case. In 1962, the first published work, which was The Human Skeleton in Forensic Medicine by William Marion Kingman, was dedicated to forensic anthropology. In 1972, the AAFS was the first professional organization to acknowledge forensic anthropology as a discipline, and the AAFS being the American Academy of Forensic Science. It started out as the physical anthropology section, and now it is known as the anthropology section. In 1977, the American Board for Forensic Anthropology became the first credential body for forensic anthropology in the United States, and was accredited in 2009. In 1980, Dr. Hugh Berryman in Tennessee became the first forensic anthropologist to work full-time in that capacity in a medical examiner coroner office. So that was the first time in 1980 that we had a forensic anthropologist working at full-time capacity in an ME's or coroner's office. And in 1999, the first introductory textbook for forensic anthropology, the Forensic Anthropology Training Manual by Karen Ramey Burns, is published. In 2003, the first forensic anthropology laboratory, which is known as the Central Identification Laboratory of the Joint Prisoners of War Missing in Action Accounting Agency, JPAC, now DPAA, is accredited by the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors Accreditation Board, which is now known as the ANAB. In 2008, the Scientific Working Group for Forensic Anthropology, the first organization dedicated to the standardization of the practice of forensic anthropology, was established. And so in their article, Pasalaco and Cleaver divide the origins of forensic anthropology in the United States in different eras, such as the pioneering era, the formative era, and the standardization era. Just to wrap up some key figures in the development of this discipline, Thomas White is considered the father of forensic anthropology in the United States. He published a key medical legal study on skeletal identification in 1878. And Krugman was active in promoting forensic anthropology's utility to law enforcement. And now, to this day, we know that forensic anthropologists are very well involved and skilled in the identification of missing individuals and unidentified skeletal remains from crime scenes, mass disasters, and war crimes.
So how do you stay grounded, or even just like coworkers in general, like when dealing with heavy or emotionally charged material in your work? Do you guys have like support groups or anything like that?
Yes, that's a great question. I think it is essential when you're looking at this work as an individual to have a good, strong support group, and you cultivate that with other coworkers, with family, and your friends, colleagues. You might not be able to share what happened, what are you doing, because again, this is all information that you may have to discuss with the ongoing investigation, the detectives, or the judge, jury, if you are going to testify in a court of law. So in terms of the emotional and psychological impact, I have heard about the importance of why this should be done anyway. If you're a very logical and analytical thinker, you are able to compartmentalize and maybe focus on the task at hand. And that's not to say that what you're feeling or thinking about it isn't important, but it is overall sad. It might provoke certain feelings inside one, but that's why we remember why we're doing it. We want to give answers in situations where people might not be able to advocate for themselves. And this is not just only in the case of young adults, but also in the case of elder populations. But overall, yeah, from a general perspective, the things that happen within the realm of forensics and crime scene, death investigation, criminology, it is all very sad. And I think the key would be to know where your work life starts and ends, and then where you can separate that from your day-to-day life. And that is possible with proper boundaries, proper support. There's a level of self-preservation that must be had, so that way you can, care for yourself as well.
Are there any like misconceptions that people have about forensic anthropology?
Oh my goodness, where do we do with that? I'm pretty sure you've heard of the CSI effect. I think it gives a lot of people unrealistic expectations. Some results could take a little bit more than just a few days or a week. I mean, sure, I guess some results could be expedited, but even still, it's not happening in that short time frame. In terms of forensic anthropologists, I guess some like negative connotations would be like maybe that people are very morbid or like they like death and die and all these things. I have colleagues that are very professional, very scientific, analytical about this. They're not really thinking about, like, what is death? What is the meaning of life? That sort of thing. So the cool part of being an anthropologist and working with other forensic anthropologists is that you get to learn about how they got into the specialty. A lot of them were originally chemists, biologists, mathematicians. So there's so much you can do with anthropology. A lot of us did get into the field with general anthropology, and maybe we did have some curiosity of excavations, like what does it mean when you find skeletons interred, and what does that say about the site? What does that say about the individuals? What is the relationship with the individuals and the site? My background is mostly in archaeology, so I was definitely interested in the relationship of the site, the historical significance, and how these individuals related to the site, and what can their skeletal remains tell us about how they interacted with the site? How's their life? How's their diet? How's their overall health? So really, it is fascinating. I would definitely say that a misconception is that forensic anthropologists sometimes tend to be confused with forensic pathologists. And I think a very fundamental difference would be that forensic pathologist is a medical doctor and forensic anthropologist is a PhD. Now, this is where it gets interesting. In Europe and other countries, there are cases where you have MD PhDs, and some of them are very much knowledgeable in what would be the applications of forensic anthropology within medical legal forensic medicine.
How is it decided when a case or a site calls for a bioarchaeological anthropologist rather than a forensic anthropologist, or both? What determines that?
Usually a forensic anthropologist will be consulted when, there's surface evidence, say identification, clothing, anything scattered on the surface, which would lead to an interned body. And it happens often sometimes that give it 2 years, maybe a forensic anthropologist will be called, or if it's immediate, because forensic anthropologists don't necessarily have to wait until the individual is fully skeletonized. Forensic anthropologists can aid local law enforcement and the forensic pathologist, even when the individual is in the early stages of decomposition. I would like to add that a lot of forensic anthropologists, a lot of diplomats from the American Board of Forensic Anthropology are experienced bioarchaeologists. So they apply bioarchaeological frameworks and forensic anthropological frameworks into the case. So to answer your question, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer as long as you're aware that the specialist you're calling in can help you or has historically helped you. Usually when law enforcement is going to contact a forensic anthropologist, they are aware that that is the person that historically has taken care of cases in the area. And you will know forensic anthropologists have a history of working in forensic anthropology cases. Bioarchaeologists will be definitely very much heavily be immersed in bioarchaeological cases.
I had a professor who was a forensic anthropologist, so I took a couple of those kind of courses in college, and she told me that it's a very niche field that, everyone pretty much knows everyone. So if you aren't sure what to do in a certain case or whatever, there's a very high likelihood that you'll know who would know how to answer these kind of questions. But she said because it's so niche, the job market for forensic anthropologists is very small. Everyone is competing for the same position, and a lot of them, they don't get full-time work. So they have to go do other things. So be a professor on the side or be called in to do projects during natural disasters or terrorist attacks or stuff like that. So I know she worked on I think it was 9/11 identification, and then also Hurricane Katrina, identifying individuals and remains. So being professor wasn't her full-time job. I mean, it was, but because forensic anthropology didn't have a lot of full-time positions out there, they kind of just get called in to help on certain cases when needed.
Absolutely. You pretty much summed it up. A lot of forensic anthropologists, some of them do have positions in forensic science laboratories. Others are also independent consultants and researchers. Others are professors. So how you go about being a forensic anthropologist is like very, and like your professor, many forensic anthropologists and diplomats of the board, like they are professors, they're working with students. And yeah, that you summed it up very well. If you are interested in becoming a forensic anthropologist, I think it's a combination of the connections you make, the publications you work on, the cases you work on, the type of research you take on, and what work will you eventually be doing. Because in bioarchaeology, definitely very academic, so there really isn't a set path. I think that's one of the questions but when you talk to colleagues and students who are like in the process, they're like, is there like a straightforward answer? Or is there like a specific way? And the reality is that there really isn't. It really does boil down to what decisions are you going to make that are going to get you closer to where you want to get, depending on the type of research you want to do. And when I talk to students who are interested in the field, when I talk to colleagues who are thinking about like pivoting a little bit more to one side or the other, be it bioarch or forensic anthro, there is really no straightforward way to go about it. I would definitely encourage anyone who is listening to this, if you look at the Society for American Archaeology, when you look into their background and the work they've done, it's very unique to their interests. So that's one thing I would say to anyone who is interested in the field, to like be very upfront and sincere about what research interests you have and what you'd like to be doing in the field when you're working, what areas you like most. But usually you, as a forensic anthropologist, you will have to expect to be called on the field. So that is something that to keep in mind when you are undertaking this type of work.
Yeah, and I feel like the projects and publications that you work on probably help steer you in the way of like what you want to be doing like for your career and like the individuals you get to interact with. Yeah. Now, you had mentioned to me in a previous conversation that you are part of something called the Anatomy Review. What is that?
The Anatomy Review is a personal project that I'm taking on as I get back to grad school and am starting to work again with students about basically helping students and any other professional who would like to continue their revision of human anatomy. This platform is for both anthropologists, as anatomists, as anyone who is towards the anatomical sciences. And it was started basically so it can help me revise on essential topics. And also, if I in the process can help others do that, then that is helpful as well. I'm also hoping it'll be a good platform to create awareness about the importance of knowing human anatomy, skeletal anatomy, and what is it that anatomists do. I believe that many people assume that only medical students know about anatomy. Like, no, like you can be an anthropologist and also an anatomist. And then we have many colleagues that are very knowledgeable in human anatomy. So if you are definitely in the health sciences and your work involves dealing with individuals living or already deceased, it helps to know your skeletal anatomy and it helps to know the biological processes of it all and the functions of things. So the body is one big machine and you need to know how everything works. I'm hoping to also develop more content on that to cover articles dealing with topics in human anatomy, research within human anatomy, talking about the bioethics of human anatomy and anatomical donation and anatomical collections, which are all important things to discuss. And yeah, that's pretty much the Anatomy Review.
Okay, yeah, no, that's really cool because I know in college we had like an osteology lab in class kind of thing. And the same professor handed out some like shards of bone. And she's like, okay, now tell me what bone this came from. Because I don't think a lot of people realize is when law enforcement or whatever come across human remains, they're not just like fully laid out where all the bones are supposed to be and like fully intact. There are times when like the bones are shattered or they're in different places or whatnot. And you have to be very knowledgeable in like, you know, what this bone is supposed to look like or the feel of it, the texture or whatever to go to certain bones. And so like she could have handed us animal bones and we would have had no idea, you know? So unless you're like super like knowledgeable of the anatomy and how bones are laid out and where they're supposed to go. But I think that'd be a really good resource for students who are looking to go into forensic anthropology or go into anatomy or anything like that. And I think that, individuals like yourself or myself who create these platforms, first it was to serve ourselves, but to then, serve the public, I think is really, really cool. And there's a podcast called Anthropology by Gabby LaPera, where she interviews a bunch of really cool biological anthropologists, physical anthropologists. So if anybody is interested in her podcast, check it out. I think you would really like it as well.
I enjoy it a lot. Like I've taken notes. Like you have no idea. Like when they're talking about professionals who have similar research interests as mine, it is helpful to read. I mean, that's why they do publications as well. So one of the things, a little caveat, essential skills to have when you're looking into the fields of bioanthro, or if you want to call it physical anthro, you have to have good knowledge of math, statistics. I know a lot of people get disappointed when they say this, but it's like you need to know math and have like a solid understanding of algebra and statistics. Like if you're going to look at a population, you're going to need to know, what are these numbers telling us? What could this represent? What questions can you come up with when that data comes up? So yeah, to anyone who's listening and thought they didn't need, like, you kind of need math. And if you know up to like college level algebra, a little bit of pre-calculus, that helps a lot.
Now, do you feel that by obtaining an anthropology degree, it's kind of broadened your viewpoint and perspective on the world?
Absolutely. Yes. There's so much like that you see the world differently, but you also appreciate it differently. And by differently, I mean, maybe you appreciate things that normally you would have maybe taken for granted in some points. It helps you maybe to look at things from other people's perspective and maybe understand the whys of some things and how things work. So it has helped me see the world differently. And as an anthropologist, with the technology that we have now, there's so much that we can do with it. At least anthropology helped me appreciate modern languages. So I minored in modern languages when I was doing my undergrad in anthropology. And funny enough, I have not yet taken a course in linguistic anthropology, though I feel that I've got the basics covered because while we were learning modern languages, we learned about the history of the countries that spoke the language. So essentially, when we're learning a language, we're not learning how to speak it in a way. We're learning a whole history behind it, people that were there. I feel that in a way that helps me a little bit.
Yeah, no, definitely. Now, before we get to the final 4 questions, is there anything we haven't discussed today that you'd like the listeners to know about?
So I would say be very intentional about what you'd like to do when it comes to being in this field, or whether it be bioanthro, bioarch, forensic anthropology. Have your why very clear and execute it full on and hope for the best.
Now, what's the best piece of advice you'd offer to someone who's interested in getting into bioarchaeology or forensic anthropology?
To have patience and grit, a genuine desire and curiosity for what you can contribute to these fields, and how the desire can aid to what you believe to be your professional purpose, and sharing this knowledge with students, colleagues, the scientific community, and public. This can happen via journal publications or other means of scientific communication, such as educational outreach and hands-on activities, or presentations that let people engage with others, such as in-person forums. If you're actively working in forensic anthropology casework, consider becoming a board-certified analyst. And if you finished your PhD, to apply for board certification. Wherever you choose to practice, becoming a certified professional, either outside the U.S. or within the U.S. with the RPA or ABFA, a certification credential can be helpful when networking and seeking job opportunities.
Are there any changes you wish to see in your industry?
I think more accessibility to some events. I would definitely tell the students to join organizations that are very aligned to your research interests, what you'd like to do, because they have many continuing education things, and that helps.
Now, what do you absolutely love about your job in the industry you work in?
I absolutely love that we get to learn more about individuals. We get to learn more about their skeletal anatomy. We get to, in the cases of bioarchaeology and forensic anthropology, we can help humanize skeletal remains, and we can educate future colleagues, future students.
Now, finally, where can listeners learn more about you and what you do?
You can definitely reach out in the Anatomy Review. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok.
Cool. Well, I just want to thank you so much for coming on and, talking all things bioarchaeology and forensic anthropology. I think that a lot of students will definitely find the episode useful in getting into that kind of field, because I feel like it's not talked about enough, and the perception of the field is so different than what the reality of it is, just because of all the TV shows and movies out there that like incorporate it into their plot line. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Abby. Me too. It was great to meet you.
Well, you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Anthropuzzled. This show was produced by me and distributed in collaboration with the American Anthropological Association. A special thanks to Cheyenne Brewer for editing the website, L. Akers for the incredible logo design, and to Anthropuzzled's intern, Fiona, for the episode descriptions. The music is courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear of Sound and Picture. If you have any questions, you can reach me at abby.letzinger@anthropuzzled.com or as Anthropuzzled on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Until next time.